Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited today to have author, speaker, writing coach extraordinaire, Kim Stuart. Kim, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
Are you even kidding me? You didn't even have to put on a hard sell. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
And I think it's probably, I love sharing with the podcast fam when I know somebody in real life. Like we've actually met in real life, which
We
is
totally have.
Yeah, and we met because you were leading a writing workshop. Would you tell everybody about that?
Oh, sure. I get the very profound joy of helping writers get their words out of their heads and onto paper. And I do that in a couple different ways. You and I met in the in-person way, which is some writing retreats that we do with my friend Bob Goff and I have this sweet gig out in it's called the Oaks out in South, kind of, or just outside of San Diego. And so you and I met there and talked shop for a few days about writing, all things writing, the business of writing, but also just the heart of writing. And then we took a hay rack ride together, Tony, if you might remember that.
I did.
In Iowa, we call them hay rack ride. I think everyone else calls them a hay
Just
ride.
hay rides, yep.
No, we talk about the hay rack. So, and I remember laughing a lot on that hay rack ride. So that's where we began.
Yes, and I got to hear a little bit of your love story, and it was amazing. And your daughter was there, and it was super awkward,
right.
and I was here for all of it. All of it.
I have two daughters and a son, and they are very used to me saying things that later I repent for. So that was normal. That was just a Tuesday for Thea. She's very used to that situation.
Theo might have been the most impressive student in the class. Can I just say that? Like, she was on it, and her writing and she's in her teens, her late teens, and she's working on her novel, and it was just incredible. So I'm curious, if you were going to talk to a young mom about how to get kids like Thea, what would you say?
Oh, for the love of money, what a great opener. First of all, yes, Thea did come out of the womb middle-aged. And so I would love to take credit for who she is, but really there's a hardwiring issue there too. She is an avid writer and reader, and she just has had that interest from the very start. I always say she's the best writer in the house. So I'm so looking forward to when she has multiple New York Times bestsellers and I can drink more coffee and watch her royalties pour into my account. As for the kind of person she is, she had some good people paving the way. She has two elder siblings who are just really fantastic people. Despite the best efforts of their parents, who would have sabotaged at every angle, if not for prayer. Literally, that's the only thing I can tell you to do. Just pray like your life depends on it. We had, I hosted for about a decade, I hosted a group of moms every week in our home, and we would pray for our kids. And we would hear each other pray aloud for each other's kids. And so we'd go through different characteristics of the character of God and pray those characteristics into our children. And it was kind of set up in a way that we didn't get to pick the characteristic, but it was always remarkable how God seemed to know, did know, this is what your kid needs this week. Sometimes we would pray for something within the character of God, and I'd think, I haven't really thought about this. And every time within a couple of weeks, I'd think, that's what that was about. So I come from a long line of praying women, warrior-esque praying women, and I know. I have gleaned the gift that is in my own life of having people pray for me. So that's my one and only. That's my one and only. Total humility at the feet of God, saying over and over, you got me into this mess with respect, and you're going to need to get me out. And by mess, I mean becoming a parent.
Yeah. I love that. I think as I've kind of done a little bit of research on your work and the Star for Jesus book and Other Jobs You Quit, and there's an intimacy with the Lord that I have a ton of respect for in your writing and just the way you talk about Jesus. And so one of the things that we say around here a lot is that if you're not dedicated to your disciplines, you'll be destroyed by your distractions.
Oof.
Yeah. It's mostly a conviction for me because my ADD gets the best of me. What are some of the things that you do on a daily basis to stay intimate with Jesus?
This is my favorite conversation I've had in 6 months. So far, this is awesome.
You're kind.
Because this is rubber hitting the road, right? Like this is absolutely not how do we do today. This is where, how do we end up with the race finished in a way that honors the God who made us? And for me, this is the question to answer that. What's the daily? What is Wednesday? Very small things. I think the more I've gotten involved with outward facing work. So for a long time, I would have said, and this was true, I'm a stay-at-home mom and I write a little bit. Definitely the mom piece was first, though. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like I was quiet about that. Like, whatever. We don't know what's going to happen with the writing piece, but I'm positive that these children need to survive today. And so what am I doing for dinner? So for a long time, it was such a quiet thing. And then things shifted a little bit. And I'm doing more outward reaching. So meeting people like you, getting to do some things on podcasts, getting to be out there a little bit more. And the more out there, outward facing my work, the more I remember in a white knuckle way how the inward sets the tone for the outward. So that's another way of saying what you just said, right? That if we are going to have any longevity in looking outward, we sure as heck better have some time with Jesus every day. And I know that sounds like the absolute, I'm sure your listeners, obviously this is not, no one's going to give me a Pulitzer for that. It's not super inventive, but it's amazing how quickly we get that completely wrong. We'll do all this stuff for you, Lord, in your name, Lord. And also, I'll talk to you later. So for me, morning is the linchpin. I have my own practices of, we're down to one kid home. I was just thinking about this morning, how that has shifted over the years. But we have just Thea home now. The other two are in college. Those first minutes are powerful minutes. I'm talking about still in bed.
Yeah.
One of my practices, this is going to sound totally wonky pants to some people, but you do you. I make the sign of the cross on my middle-aged self. And I say, Lord, you have my yes today. You're it. I say yes to you. I did not grow up in a genuflecting community. That's not a part of my practice, but physically saying to my body, everything that comes to me today has gone through your hand. I submit to that. I'm actually not in charge of that. So I'm saying that while I still have crusty stuff in my eyeballs. And when, someone saw me in person, they'd say, "Oh, are you ill?" At that moment, I'm saying everything that comes to you passes through you, and the cross covers me before I hit my feet on the floor. Then it's wild times, getting the dog walk, getting Thea to school. And then I have another round of quiet where it's just me and Jesus talking and listening to each other. I read a lot. And so for my practice of that, it's usually a Psalm, Old Testament, New Testament epistle, and the gospel. And I have a person telling me this, and it is right now it's the Book of Common Prayer, which was probably written a gazillion years ago. See, I'm not even a good historian, but I just know I'm not in charge, because if I'm in charge, then I find all the places that make me feel good.
Yeah.
If someone else is in charge, then I'm gutted. And that's the point, to be gutted and to be refining over and over. So those are two things that I won't let go of.
I love it.
Even traveling, I have to have that spot, because of my own darn self. I know otherwise I'll burn this ship by 9 a.m. and it will be with my tongue. So I need to say different words starting out for sure.
I recently saw on Instagram that you and your husband, Mark, have celebrated 26 years of marriage.
Indeed.
So congratulations. You guys, looks like you spent some time in the desert, which is awesome. I love that. Other than sounding really creepy when I say all that, but no,
I love it. That's awesome.
Here's the two questions I had. One is, what one piece of advice would you give to a high capacity leader like yourself, like someone who's traveling, who's putting out content, someone who's coaching people? I mean, there's so many people in your life, and it's a very outward facing life. Like many of the leaders who listen to this podcast, they're leading high level companies. They're trying to be Christians in their company. They got lots of people. Yeah. And then they've got this spouse back here who's not, it's not back here in a bad sense. It's just back here. Like, this feels like a whole different part of my life, right? Like one weekend you're writing at the Oaks with Bob Goff, and the next you're back home folding laundry, and you're very open about that, right? How do you and Mark stay connected when it feels like you're living in two different worlds?
Oh, golly. Great question. I'm going to ask you all of these questions, actually. So Mark is an introvert, and much to his chagrin, he married an extrovert. We need each other like crazy, right? Yeah. One of the ways I bridge those moments that you say, like, physically on a mountaintop at the Oaks where everything is glorious. And, I live in Iowa. There are no mountains, and there are no people saying, wow, you were so inspirational. So when I come home and there are crusty things on the counter, or the dog has developed a kidney problem because no one else took him out, those are reality moments. And I have more of those than the mountaintop. And so maybe because so much of my working life was quiet and was kind of shoved into the empty spaces where most, the vast majority of the hours had to do more with diapers and carpool and what have you. That set me up to remember exactly who butters my bread. So I haven't had a whole lot of temptation to start thinking that I'm bigger than my britches, because the britches are always really in need of laundry. For Mark and for me, one of the ways we bridge those separate experiences is as much as possible, I make sure everybody knows each other. So sometimes that's not possible. I mean, for a lot of your listeners, that's just not an option. But as far as I can, I mean, Bob definitely knows Mark. Maria knows Mark. The whole family knows Mark. We've hung out together, even when it's inconvenient. I have tried to like make those spaces possible. I talk about each to each other. I know that sounds so tiny, but I think
it's probably really important.
Yes, the more we're just everything's always on the table. And always in light. That's a wise move, because then you don't feel like a person divided. The other piece of it is I know for myself, time with Mark is what makes a difference to me. He's super, super kind with his words, very encouraging. He is the cheerleader of cheerleaders. But what means even more to me is when we're just together. So if I start ignoring that, I'm the one who starts to get real cranky. He in general, think of Job, and then you'll picture Mark. He is a very long-suffering person. But I know for sure that I get real sassy if I feel like I haven't connected with you, haven't been with you. So, that's just with time.
Sure.
A bazillion years together, after a while, you're like, oh, okay, I know. You go quicker to the resolution of what's not working quite well enough. But trying to merge those worlds instead of even thinking about them as separate, I think is a good move.
One more super personal question to ask you.
Oh, fantastic. I love it.
It's perfectly okay if you don't want to answer it.
I definitely will, and might regret it later, but no worries.
I recently saw the passing of your friend, Amy.
Yeah.
And I'm really sorry about that. I just want you to know that. I also know that your brand, for what I don't know what else to call it, kind of your outward facing personality is witty and funny and sharp, and grief is this terrible privilege. And yet a lot of people who are in your world aren't in your world like Amy and that world around that. And so as a leader, how do you live in that tension of I'm a funny, sarcastic, witty person, and I'm also feel like my insides are getting punched?
Wow. what did you call grief? A terrible privilege.
That's a quote from somebody I stole. I don't know who actually said that first, but it wasn't me.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. Thank you for even bringing up Amy. So for listeners, my friend Amy, who is my age, Amy's husband, Eric, went to dental school at the same time that Mark was in dental school. And we did all of these firsts together. So our first houses, our first forays into adulthood when we were trying to, we were first married and everything was so foreign. And we had a Bible study that we met for every week for 4 years. And first trying to have babies. And so all of those really important births I had with Amy. And Amy was diagnosed with brain cancer in July, and she went home to Jesus on Christmas morning. She and Eric have 6 children, and their youngest is 10. So yes, I did write a little bit about that. I didn't write that Amy's was one of 3 funerals that we had in the month of December, all of people that we love dearly and are close to, including my friend Hannah, who was 24. And I spoke at her funeral, and it was absolutely horrendous. Just not the right, we're not built for this. We're not built. The original design was not death. And so there's never a time when you're like, oh yeah, that's great. Makes total sense, no matter the age. And so your question is a very poignant one for me, Tony, because I don't know the answer to it. I am wrestling with that. I was a horrible junior higher, and I'll tell you why. In junior high, social currency is being able to kind of move easily from one spot to another, and to have a really good poker face. And I have a horrendous poker face. So starting in junior high, my mother would say to me, "You're shouting with your face." I'm like, "What? This is neutral." So that carries over into everything, including social media. I don't know how to just be one beat, because no one lives like that. So I guess the fumbling, still trying to figure out limping answer to that is that I view social media in the same way that I view my books. And when I'm speaking and on a podcast, my goal is to reach out past that, whatever the medium is, to the listener or to the reader, and to meet her or meet him in that space as my real self. And what that means is I'm going to have to say things that are painful, because the human experience is full of pain. I keep it short. I mean, just on a logistical, just like a ticky-tack level, I don't feel that social media is the place for me to write 1,500-word essays, because it's really hard to have a good conversation there. And I need to sit with you with coffee. So I try to keep it short. And I try to think about the person on the other side who also is missing somebody, or who definitely knows what loss feels like. And to allow that person to feel gutted. That's a part of maybe my faith experience that has been a long time in coming. I grew up in a wonderful church that taught me so many things, but maybe one of its cracks in the armor would have been that we really rushed to singing Because He Lives. Like we just run there. Where are the gaithers? Let's just go straight to everything's fine. Everything's gonna be fine. And while that biblically is sound, I have never found that super helpful when I'm looking at Amy's daughter.
Sure.
So I know people out there think that and feel that. I got beautiful responses. I write this newsletter, and I wrote a little bit about this. The emails that came to me were straight on the front lines of grief. I'm not worried about losing those people. Like, oh, I need to be dance, monkey, dance. I got to be funny, because that's not the human experience. I have to be willing to wade into all the things. But then I push myself for a little bit of brevity, because those big emotions, you actually don't need very many words.
That's good. Not just about this topic, but in general, how do you know when something is not so sensitive to the touch that it's okay to write about? So kind of that cliche is like, how do you know when you're preaching through scars and not wounds? And if you're talking to a leader who's maybe a verbal processor like myself, and you go into, how do you know when not to talk about something?
Oh, golly, these are all things I'm learning. So just know there's no expert in the room here. I would say Bob and I have talked about this quite a bit, and we've kind of landed, I think we asked Lisa Turkhurst this one time because she has been through all sorts of things and has written about many of them.
Many of them.
Yes. And I asked her that question, like, how do you know when you're ready to say these things out loud? And she said that she has come to know that if she is sharing what she's sharing completely out of hope for the reader, then she's probably in a good space. If there is any bit of, it's time for you to hear my side of the story, then that's a no. Then that's stay with your journal. But we're usually probably more intuitive than we want to say out loud for that. Like if this is coming from a place of freedom and healing, and I'd love to share the tools that I've learned, then that's a green light. If there are a lot of other reasons I share stories that are not nearly that noble. So take care. I will say one thing I have learned. Early on, I had asked a mentor of mine, do you think I should write about this? And she just without pause said, absolutely not. With respect, if I could go back to that younger Kim in that moment, I would probably say, she's doing her best to help you. I think I would write about that in a journal and keep it to yourself, email it to yourself, and then return to kind of massage it for a greater audience, because I didn't write, and I wish I would have. I wish I would have had first person account during that time, not even to share with the whole world, but just for my own heart, what I was learning, what I was wrestling with, what fist I was shaking at God. I have nothing from that time period. And I wish I would have. So I would say there's a time and a place and an audience. Absolutely right during the time. 100% yes. Yes, do it. Wait to decide the safe place to share that or helpful place.
I think some people write and some people are writers, right? Like, and I would put you in that later category of like, you're a writer. You've got eight different books out there. Like, and so for you, and I would put myself in that category too, where I need to process I need to process words. Like, and actually podcasting has kind of done a lot of that for me too.
Totally. Same.
Yeah. It's just like, it's like a lazy version of writing in my head.
Who needs journals?
I feel
so microphone.
Right. Dang it. I had such a good question and then I got distracted.
No worries.
Well, here's the kind of where I was going with that is the daily practice of writing for you. Is it daily? Is it weekly? Imagine that you're talking to a leader who's like, I want to be a good communicator to my team. I want to be that person that inspires. What kind of practice should we be working on? Are you doing 1,000 words a day? Are you doing what's your style?
Oh gosh. You're outing all of the things that I don't do right.
Well, you're making a lot of people feel really good.
Absolutely no. I do not write every day. I write on deadline, whether it's self-imposed or from a publisher. It just becomes a math problem. So if I'm working on a new book, I break it up into how many weeks you've said 1,000 words a day. That's what I do in production time. So 1,000 words a day, 5 days a week, move it into how many months it will take to do a rough draft. Now, that's not pretty writing. It's just get her done writing. When I'm not actively writing a book or on a contract, I do not journal. Sorry, kids, you'll never know about the interior life of your mother. I take a lot of notes in a lot of places of what I'm hearing from and processing from other people, but it's not an organized, today is this date in 2025 and this is how I'm feeling. I should, Just, listen, Tony, you're just calling out all the things I should, and I don't. So I don't know, maybe I should try that in my life. I think because I'm ingesting so many words from friends and from clients, I just don't have a lot of output. But I'm okay. Honestly, I'm giving you a hard time for giving me a total guilt complex, but actually I'm really okay with this because there are seasons that works and seasons not. In a leadership role, how would I encourage other people to use words or the kind of the gathering of words to inspire their team? For me, I love being a sponge. So coming to a podcast like yours and letting you download is delightful. I read a ton. I really like reading the writing of dead people. And by that, I mean, there are plenty of church mothers and fathers who have gone before, and they've asked all of these questions, and they've had some really great things to say. So I like reading people who've wrestled in other
What's your favorite
times.
dead person book?
Oh, well, by far, my two faves are C.S. Lewis and Eugene Peterson. I think they're ridiculous.
If you had like one book to, if someone's like, okay, Kim, I'm going to read Dead People now. You've inspired me. What
Can that not be the question? Feels a little bit. I feel like I have some regret on how I framed that.
Should have nuanced it a little bit. What's the one book? What's the one book?
Probably Run with the Horses by Peterson.
Okay.
He looks at a life of meaning and purpose through the lens of the prophet Jeremiah. And it is so accessible and so phenomenal. And I finally coerced Mark into reading it recently, actually on that trip that you mentioned into the desert. And I kept looking over and he was crying. It is a ridiculous book. For me, it was one of those books that I would read a paragraph and think, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to start this all over. It's one of those.
Oh, wow.
But not super heady, it met me right where I was. So love it. It's great. Great book. I met him in person one time and made a total mini of myself.
No, tell.
It's horrible. It's just so embarrassing. I shouldn't be trusted with people I greatly admire in person. I should be relegated to the email space, the handwritten letter. Well, we were writing for this years ago. We were writing for the same publisher at the same time. The Message paraphrase came out through Manav Press, and I had books coming out. And we used to have meetings where we would all get together in Atlanta or Denver, or whatever. They don't do that anymore. But somehow, I don't even know how I scored this invitation to this. It was literally an upper room. Go ahead and make all of the Jesus references you want. And I walked up these stairs, and Mark was with me, and he was speaking. His wife was in the front row. We were right behind them. I don't remember a word he said. I just remember thinking, this guy, his work has changed the way we move in our house, because Mark, who had a serious distrust of Romans in particular, understood Romans for the first time in the Message paraphrase. And so we had talked quite a bit about him at our house. So I go up to him. Why am I telling you this story? I go up to him and I'm like, immediately verklempt. I start making some women are able to cry elegantly, like in a movie. I sound like a cat that has been injured. Those are the sounds I make when I cry. So I'm like, and I tell him how he's changed my life. Mark's getting progressively concerned because he's seen me do things like this before. And Eugene Peterson was so kind and so gracious. And also I could tell that he wanted to not be there anymore because I was scaring him. And so then I left. That was it. I cried, made cat noises, didn't say any of the wonderful things I could have said. Nope, just sounded feline and slunk away with Mark like, thanks a lot for Romans.
What did Mark say?
Oh, he said, he was a little bit verklempt too, because this guy's so important to us. But I think he just said, thank you so much for your work. I really appreciate it, which is a better way to approach someone who's changed your life.
And then he turned you around and walked you out.
Push repeat. That's been our whole marriage. Gosh.
Oh, that's amazing. That's a great story.
It's a really unfortunate.
You do a lot of work with leaders all over the country, and I think you have an interesting perspective as a writing coach. So whether it's at the Oaks or whether it's the one-on-one work that you do with leaders, I would love, and this is an unfair question, just so you know, I'm about to ask it. I would love to get your opinion on trends and leadership, because you get to see their inner monologue.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that the Holy Spirit does a lot of work at the same time amongst leaders. And I think we're seeing some of that, like in terms of revival and faith in the workplace. And a lot of the work that I get to do with leaders is from my perspective, but I'm curious from your perspective, what are you seeing in trends in leadership and pain points in leadership?
Holy smokes. What I see are really encouraging things. So one of the things I see is your lane, talking about leading as a person of faith, leading specifically within the workplace. I've seen a lot of those conversations arise, which I think is a very natural and organic outgrowth of maybe some of our questions in other spheres, and really a better understanding of people following Jesus in the whole of the human experience, not just on Sundays in front of a lectern. So that has been very fun. In publishing, that's definitely a trend. Another trend in publishing, which often kind of mirrors some leadership pieces, is kind of dovetailing what we were talking about before, the inner life of a follower of Christ. So in the making things smaller and more quiet. Many, many books came out in the last, I'd say, 18 months regarding the discipline of silence, how to live in such a very, very loud world and preserve what it means to have quiet. I had a beautiful conversation with a woman named Sarah Clarkson not too long ago, and she wrote a book called Reclaiming Quiet. And so that idea, and there were several pitches for different books that are kind of in that vein recently. So that says to me, people are looking at the loudness, is that a word, loudness? At the volume, and feeling like it's a cacophony. It's too loud. There's too much everywhere in the church, in the marketplace, on our phones, in the political sphere. It's just too loud. And so there's been, I think, a really beautiful exploration that's just restarting, right? I mean, Christendom, we've done this many times before. This is not a new idea, but the idea of sitting and being quiet. I've had several people talking about a different kind of prayer that is more listening, less talking. So it seems to be coming in multiple spaces. Sabbath is, lots of folks are, I think that's the same thing, right? Lots of new books about Sabbath, which as we know is definitely not a new idea. But lots of people in very different walks of life wondering again, how is Sabbath a gift and how have I squandered it? Again, the idea of rest and quiet and making the noise relegated to the place that it doesn't affect your spirit, or that you can push it aside, right? And hear the voice that actually matters. So those are some things that I'm seeing.
That's amazing. You mentioned something there about hearing the voice that actually matters. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you discern God's voice when it comes to writing projects? Because you've done fiction, you've done nonfiction, whether it's even just the post on Instagram, like how do you know when God's telling you to write something about something?
Well, I hope I've gotten better at this, and also ask me tomorrow. For me, that is a question for Jesus over and over. I often sit at my laptop with my hands open. God doesn't need me to do that, but I do. I need to say physically, what story would you like to tell? Because you're the best storyteller. So if I have a posture of humility and curiosity, that goes a lot better. As far as deciding a theme or something to land on for a long time, they typically the idea just sticks and stays. It comes up in conversation in ways that I'm not engineering. right? So it's not necessarily that I have a talk coming up that I'd like to talk about this. It's more that, my friend and I end up circling back to this, or I talk to my neighbor and I feel that rhythm kind of settling into a cadence of, gosh, I'm really thinking a lot about this. Maybe there's something more there. Sometimes it's just an itch I have to scratch. Sometimes, in fact, I was just talking with my friend Anne recently, and she was wondering about if I would ever brush off the old blog or do a Substack, a little bit longer form writing that's not an entire book. And we talked about how sometimes just kind of processing that, as you and I just talked about a couple minutes ago, sometimes it's just a quick hit and I'm done. But if it's the quick hit and then I keep circling back, that's usually, I try to pay attention to that. Obviously, all of this is committed to prayer. And who even knows? God in his ridiculous grace, I'm sure we will have conversations when we're face to face where he's like, well, that was an interesting choice that you made to write about that for so long. Do you want to talk to me about that? So I'm not hitting it in all cylinders, but I'd like him to tell me. I would prefer a bulletin if he could just be really clear. And lots of times he is, if I will just be quiet long enough to listen.
That's good. Are you working on a project currently?
I am working on super secret projects that I can't talk about.
Those are my favorite.
I'm a total weirdo. I don't talk about it until the baby is born.
No. So then will you promise to come back on when the baby's born?
It would be my total delight. This has been so much fun. You should really do this for your full-time job. Wink, 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 wink. I know you are. Well chosen. You're a natural.
I still have one more question for you.
Okay,
one more
great.
question.
I'm in.
It's the last one. All right.
Yeah,
but
love it.
Before I ask it, I know the podcast family is going to want to connect with you all over the interwebs. Where is the best place to learn all things Kim?
Well, I have the prerequisite website, interweb website, KimberlyStuart.com. It's Stuart. Instagram, Kimberly.Stuart.writes, as in writes a book, not writes the ship. Those are very different things. I'd love to see you there. I love people.
And you put out a newsletter how frequently?
I do. Oh, shoot. See, this is why I'm very bad at marketing and sales. You're right, Tony. I do have a newsletter. Sign up. That's at the website, too. You can click on subscribe. I do it every other week. And that's just a lovely community that has developed. I only talk about real things and usually have to issue an apology to my family. So, there's a rhythm. Guys, you were in the newsletter today. Should we talk? So that's what happens there.
You're basically a preacher. That's exactly what that's what I do from the pulpit.
Oh, that's good to know.
My son at college will watch when I'm preaching online and he'll be like, had to talk about me today, huh? And I was like,
clear that with me.
I really miss you, son. That's where this is.
Oh,
that's where it's
good.
coming from. So
that's a good remessaging.
You were on my heart.
Oh, wow. The on my heart move. Nice.
He's a almost 19-year-old boy. He doesn't care about my heart.
He really does not. It's good to know that. I have a 19-year-old boy,
we're
too.
honest about it.
Let's just face it.
Okay, last question I love to ask people. It's an advice question. I'm going to invite you to go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, except I get to name the season of life that you're in.
Oh, I love that.
Now, I want to take you back to your wedding day 26 years ago. Imagine you're sitting there in your white dress and you could pull up a chair in front of that younger version of Kim, sit knee to knee with her, hold her hand, look her in the eyes, and give her one piece of advice about the next 26 years. What are you going to tell her?
Well, I've got a lot to tell her. If I have to pick one, I would say actually what an elderly woman said to me when I asked her this question. I asked her this question when I was engaged. She'd been married, I think, 60 years. And I said to her, well, what's the deal? What's your advice for me? Why has this worked for you for 60 years? And she said two things. Never keep score. Everybody loses. And assume the best. And she said, by that, I mean, when you're in the weeds of an argument, it's easy to forget that top level, which is what you're arguing about, is rooted in, you know, this person and you know he loves you. So start there and then move backwards. Best advice ever. Assume the best. Know that Mark loves you. Yeah. And know that you love him. You're in this. So start there, and then the other stuff tends to sort exactly in the right priority.
I love it. I love it. In my marriage retreats, we always say you got to give your spouse the bod.
The bod.
The benefit of the doubt.
Of the doubt.
Yeah.
Or your bod. But that's
either way,
a different podcast.
It just helps the guys remember it. It just helps the guys remember it.
That's good. I'm using that. Awesome.
Kim, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. Thanks for hopping on and being so quick to say yes. I deeply appreciate it.
Are you kidding me? The gratitude is all mine. I'm just so grateful. It was so fun. Ask me again. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. As soon as your secret sauce project comes out, you just let me know.
Got it. I'm a really slow worker, so it might be a minute, but I'll let you know.
Well, then let's just do it next year.
Okay, perfect. Deal.